Hey, good morning, everybody. What is going on? It's Thursday morning. This is Thursday Morning Live, and I am excited about being here this morning. That's for sure. Hey, I want to ask you a question this morning. What are you grateful for? I think that gratitude becomes more and more important in our lives as we get older, as things go on in our lives. And I just want to ask you if you've stopped this morning and just taken a couple of minutes to just think through a couple of things that you're grateful for. The last few days, the weather's been great. I've been able to take a walk on the beach. I'm just grateful for being able to get out in the sun, enjoy some nice weather, and just kind of really enjoy life. We get so caught up in work and what we do on a daily basis and trying to push the ball forward that how do we really take a step back and maybe just enjoy life for a little bit? Well, anyhow, give that some thought this morning as we dive into this morning's live. If you're new to the show, welcome. Thank the person that invited you and make sure you got a cup of coffee in your hand because we're going to rock the airwaves this morning. Hey, if you are new, please like us. Help our algorithm. If you're following us on Facebook, join our Facebook community at Multifamily Unplugged. And if you're on YouTube, just if you'd smash that subscribe button and follow us on YouTube as well. We're always bringing great relevant content to you, especially if you're in the real estate multifamily space. That is our major focus and passion. But this morning, my guest, Paul Nelhart, he's from the north suburbs of Chicago, what we call the North Shore of Chicago. He's got a company called HX Incorporated, which we're going to talk about that a little bit this morning. And he's the host of the podcast Intrinsic Mindset. So I'm sure we're going to get into some mindset stuff this morning as well. So here's Paul. Hey, good morning, Paul. How are you?
Hi, everybody. Hey, thanks, Mike. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you bet. A little bit of a rough start for me here this morning. I feel like my tongue is tied a bit, but
I know how that feels. Sometimes you got to get in the groove and start flowing, and it always does, though.
Yeah, I'm sure you've been up a couple hours longer than me because I'm on the West Coast, so I'm on Pacific time, so it's a little bit earlier than what it is in Chicago there. So
Yep. So yeah, thanks for letting me be part of your network here. This is great.
yeah, no, I appreciate it. I appreciate you coming on. We got introduced by a good friend of both of ours, Carl Moose, we call him, and he's a character, that's for sure. But
He is your focus guy. He goes by, but yeah, he's a great dude.
Yeah, for sure. And one thing about Carl is he's always connecting me with great people. So I'm glad that you're here this morning and appreciate that connection. But hey, so when I start this, my podcast, I am always asking people, and I say, Paul, that one of these days I'm going to write a book, right? And on this one question, but in one word, what best describes you personally and professionally?
One word. Oh, Mike, you start out with a tough one. I love it. So it's funny because there's different seasons of our life, and I'll get to the point, but it is there's times where you embody grit, courage, and all these things. But to one word, I would have to intuitively kind of feel like, say, fluid. I believe right now it's a very fluid time in my life. So fluid is a word that just comes to mind.
Well, that's interesting. The last couple of podcasts I've done, people have said words that nobody's ever said before. And I've been doing this 3 years now. Where's fluid come from? What's that mean right now?
So it's interesting because you mentioned the intrinsic mindset. So the word I was kind of thinking when you were saying that, it was intrinsic, but it's really fluid because there's such a time in my right now, I'll say, as far as the seasons of life go. And I digress for a moment here as I tell my wife pretty much every day now as I want to figure out what I want to be when I grow up, but is that there's a fluidity between building, maintaining, and kind of restructuring the past of today for the future goals. So it sounds a little convoluted, but to this point is that I have been, I don't want to say working because that seems like there's effort and that seems like there's grit, but I've been embodying the fluidity of of the days better, being a bit more present. Now this is years of practice, but is and understanding that the opportunities, the synchronicities, and the people that I come with, that I get to co-create with, I have to have enough. I can't be too rigid in my life. There were times in my life that I felt like I was too rigid,
Hmm.
and an allowance. And I love that you started this by saying gratitude, because the gratitude is actually also is a gateway of having allowance and fluidity and molding into the environment, but also keeping enough form to me to not get lost and get swept away in it.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm glad you mentioned gratitude because, whenever I start this Thursday morning, and I always kick it off with something and I never pre-plan it. So it's not like I'm thinking about it before when I hit the go live button and we start to go live, all of a sudden something comes up for me. And
Yeah.
and I don't know if that's just from time of doing this or what, but it's, you know, I, I don't believe if I went back and watched these that it would ever be the same thing. So
Yeah,
I like fluid because that's kind of what life is,
it
right?
really is.
We're doing life. It's
Yeah.
ever changing, ever moving, ever progressing. So
It is, and you had touched on something too. I think I I don't want to go on a limb and say I guarantee, but I'm sure that your shows have progressively over time become much more engaging, much more, we'll call it entertaining, or bringing value to people, because you've really embodied that state of openness when you come into it. So I do like that, and some of that I would imagine for all of us comes with age and confidence and our knowing that our ability is that things are gonna call to us, and in the right capacities and in the right timing.
yeah, absolutely. Hey, so tell us a little bit about you, Paul, your
Yeah.
background, what you do, what HX is, and the format of your podcast.
Yeah, yeah. So there's a little bit to unwind there. So I'll try to stay condensed because I want to make sure that we're on point with your network and your audience here. But so I really kind of say that I come back from kind of a background of a few different industries. One is marketing. I had a marketing firm tied to tangibles, which I'd call print procurements and things like that, large campaigns. Another is the real estate industry. I've had my real estate license for many years. There's been times where I've really made that a primary. But for the most part, I've been a little bit of that, we'll call it the weekend warrior, what have you, in the real estate arena. But I've done my share of real estate deals. And then the third is really, it's more in the consulting arena. So top line front end of businesses, helping small to medium sized businesses grow that front end and understanding kind of where we fit in all those things. I'm not the guy who's going to squeeze the pennies and the lemon on the bottom side, but we're gonna work heavy on that front end and expand and open opportunities for the businesses. So and on top of that, I will say too, let me back in those windows of those three things. It's really, I've always had a primary, I'd say, goal, objective, things that I would embody really is just to be effective for the person I'm talking to across the proverbial table, on the other side of the phone, other side of the email, whatever that is. It's the primary is to be effective, useful, and bringing value to that person in whatever capacity it is. Whether I'm going to be able to be involved or not, there's just an embodiment and a mindset with that. And I believe that if people kind of do that, I believe we can continue to help the people even that much more within our life. The other one too is you touched on the podcast. So intrinsic mindset, to me, intrinsic is really that unique, that fingerprint. We're all a little bit of our own little fingerprint in this world. And have our own unique flair, outlooks, perceptions, perspectives. And really it's kind of just have those conversations. When we do these types of podcasts like we're doing now, there's a couple different styles. One would be an interview, the other is a conversation. I really like the conversation style. And even too, like you actually have more of a conversation style, even though you're asking me questions, I can tell that you have a flow to your conversation.
Yeah.
In there.
Yeah. Well, like I said in the beginning, we'll wind up in some rabbit hole, try to figure out how to get out.
Yeah. Yeah. I was going to say one more thing too with the podcast is lately I've been doing a series about creativity, which is a really fascinating subject because it covers and ties into really all aspects of our lives. And I'll kind of quickly say is that we as humans are incredibly imaginative and creative creatures. And sometimes what it's really interesting is to see on the book end is I'll talk to people and some off camera and they'll say, I'm not really that creative. And it's almost like they kind of, maybe it's almost that little bit of kick your feet, drop your shoulders. And I'm not really that creative. And it's just really interesting because we're inherently creative. We're born creative. And sometimes it's permission, maybe that little bit of internal courage, that little bit of nudge. And I believe people just need some of that little bit of nudge to recognize that we are powerful creatures, our minds and imagination and how we approach the world. We create our day. Just every day is created by us.
What's really interesting is, and I kind of want to ask this, I guess, but do you find that some people, maybe people in certain professions or job functions are more creative than others?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a great question because, and I'm sorry, I jumped on you because I got excited for a second. So, because I've seen people, you hear about people with like coding, they get lost and they won't eat for days and they're just focused on coding. There's such a creative aspect or such a creative outlook. They might not see it and recognize it like that. I see people get lost in like spreadsheets, working through the sales metrics and building and it's absolutely amazing. I think some of it is that this is my personal view. I don't believe that there's inherently, I don't believe anybody has an advantage over anybody else when it comes to creativity. I think there's also this idea, which I'll say is this idea of a creative, the tortured creative, the Hemingways, there's the Picassos and, the Van Goghs, these tortured, they're lost in their actual art of oil painting and writing and, or if it's music composing, whatever that is. I think there's an image of that and people in their mind maybe say they reserve it for that type of person. But when you watch people this is also ties into the state of flow. So when you watch people and they're in that state of flow, there's a real creative, and I'll use the word fluid again. There's a real fluid quality to it. It's a comfort and ease, confidence. They're just in their zone. So I personally don't feel that anybody has a greater advantage over anybody else.
It's interesting, and I want to come back and talk about the word flow in a minute here, but I just wanted to make a comment, and where I was kind of heading with that whole creativity thing is, I think entrepreneurs, business owners are very creative and creative. I know myself when I can get quiet and I can sit back and work on my business versus working in my business, because, I get more creative. The ideas kind of flow, right? And they come more to the forefront, which gives me the opportunity to implement more things into my business. But do you think that, and where I was going with that whole person, job description is, hey, we all have maybe done a personality test, right? In the past. The one I really like is the DISC test. And it says what you are, and I'm a very high D. I'm a driver. I could, I could, if I chose to, and I have for periods of time in my life, I'll get up, start work at 5 o'clock in the morning. And when I hit a wall at 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night is when I'm done, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm being creative. It just means that I'm checking boxes off my to-do list,
But I would say there's still a connection point. Now, this might sound a little disjointed at first. So if you take the essence of desire, it means that I have this and I don't necessarily want it in this version. I want this. Somehow there's a creative path there. And whether it's cognizant, whether it's intuitive, you're taking steps that weren't there, and especially for entrepreneurs, it's the trailblazers. It's the path that doesn't exist. The ones that are people that are truly making leaps and bounds. Now, when you think about in an organization too, is that the more things, I'm just kind of creating this contrast between just say like a data entry employee, is that there's a set of rules. You do this, you do that, you do this. There's just a set of 1, 2, 3, 4, paint by numbers. And in your example with the entrepreneur is there's the gap is not paint by numbers to where I'm at today, where I want to go, or what this next task is. So essentially, I'm going to call it, and maybe this is just a labeling thing, but I'm going to call it as highly creative. I right now, I'm going to wake up, if it's 5 a.m., I need to figure out how to get through this to-do list. and go beyond. So you could argue that, well, I just have a task and I have enough understanding to kind of get the steps through it. I'm going to go out on a limb and even say some of it it ties into our self-talk. We have to creatively ramp ourselves up to do it. And I don't want to overcook the word creative either. That's also not fair. But I believe to what you kind of described in that iteration, I have this, I want it to be this. It's not the same, and there's no direct path necessarily.
So it kind of goes back, and I like that you said, hey, I don't want to overkill the word creative, right?
Mm-hmm.
It kind of goes back to your original word of being fluid, right? Yes. Flow. How do you get in the flow? How could somebody say, hey, okay, I need to get in the flow better? Or is that something that just kind of naturally happens for people?
So there's a quote. I'm going to butcher it. I'm going to just give you the highlight. There's a writer. Oh my gosh. Anyways, it's basically something along the lines of, I get up and create and write every day. I get highly creative writing every day. Good thing it happens to me every time at 9 a.m. every morning. So there's a sense of, I would say too, because I've talked about flow with a number of people as well too. And in essence, there's a discipline. There can be disciplines within flows. There's certain ways that we approach things, either modalities, showing up at the same time. I would actually encapsulate it into, first, I would say the body. And then next is actually having the creative space, or not creative, I'm sorry, safe space. And the third is actually being able to have the mind capacity to allow that to stay and retain in that space. So I would say with the body movement, these are obvious common sense things. Keep the body in shape, or whatever version of that is. Keep the blood moving. Get into those. There's being predictability that your mind really can grasp onto when you're living in a chaos state, when it's always different, or you have a messy desk or whatever that is, or there's people talking around you. If you can find those spaces that are consistent, and I call them safe, but they're safe because they're familiar. And right. Then, and the allowance of your mind, and this is when people this would go off in a rabbit hole of even some short meditations, things to just calm your mind, slow that inner voice, the mind's voice, take the mind. I call it the deep breath of the mind, where you're just, and come back into it. I believe you're not forcing it, but you've created a space for flow to be fluid and move.
Yeah. It's interesting because I can tell the difference when I'm in flow versus when I'm fighting it. Right. Yeah. And I think that's the other side of it, right? Is that you kind of fight it, and yeah. It's like you're struggling to get things done. And, we all know that the brain is such a powerful tool, right? And that, if we can control our mind and control our thinking, I mean, Napoleon Hill talked about it years and years ago, right? And he learned it from his mentor. But the mind is such a powerful thing. I love the quote, what you believe you can conceive and achieve, right? So.
Yeah. I while you were saying that too, as I thought of something. So sometimes I'll get stumped and delay and stall. And I'm going to go back into kind of having grace with yourself too, because there's times where procrastination, people beat up on the word procrastination. Now there's true procrastination, but there are times where your intuitive mind, body, mentality, state of being is actually stalling, because you know that there's a better, more effective way, and you're actually stalling to a point. So, but this also comes back in creating those spaces so we can get into that. But I would say that it's a little bit of the mix of, there's the discipline, but I would say give yourself grace. I know that there are times I have to do it all the time. I get so upset. I'm looking at a big to-do list. I'm like, I do not feel like I'm getting anything done. Or what happens too is I allow myself to get caught in the reactive day. Open the emails. Oh, look, there's 10 emails. I better just start tinkering around in my emails, and the list is still there when I come out of this little cave of emails. And so this is the prioritization and understanding where your true goal sets are. And as the goal sets shape the day today, what is that priority? What can you really drop off?
Yeah. So how do you feel about gratitude? I mean, I kind of off the cuff this morning came off with that,
I love
right?
it. I think there's just, I think what it is there's a recognition. We truly get lost in our minds, our emotions, and it's a way to almost gain perspective. There's things like, well, it's also time, it's awareness. It's perception and perspective, and just, kind of that difference is perception is kind of through our lens, through our emotional lens, through our our glasses, our goggles. But if you're able to kind of step out and be the observer, gain perspective, you're able to put yourself in other people's shoes. You're able to create, empathy, mindfulness, and be aware of your surroundings. And gratitude is in that. This is my opinion. Gratitude, it can be in that window. Gratitude will help you gain perspective, being like, oh my gosh, because there's a sense of, there's a saying, another saying too, but I won't even try to capture it. But basically, it's like we're living somebody else's dream in a sense.
Mm.
Our places we are with our love, our finances, our homes, or whatever that is. Our clock, and when it comes to work hours, whatever that is, we're living somebody else's dream. Somebody else would just die to have our life. So there's recognition, but we are again incredibly imaginative and people, human, creatures that will torture ourselves. Nobody will talk worse about me than me. You can't say anything to me that I can say, that I would say 10 times worse about myself. These are the things you need to be able to get out of. So the gratitude is a phenomenal way of gaining perspective and having grace and recognition within your day even.
So as we start to wind down, I kind of ask some, off cuff questions, but why don't you? What are a couple things that you're grateful for this morning?
Oh my gosh, the gratitude. So I always, it's for me, it's always starting with my family. I have two young boys and my wife. I mean, I couldn't ask for just greater love in my life, 100%. Um, I go to, of course, we run through the things like health, and when I was beaten, I'm like, I can be better. But, I'm walking around, I'm breathing, I'm good. And I think too, is that like, I'm actually going to go back to that word fluid, because that just came today. And I realized, I was like, wow, that I have in my life, I built my life in a sense of fluid on the clock and fluid in my emotions. And I'm not saying, don't get me wrong, I haven't mastered this. If anybody's listening, we're always working on this. And I believe that state of being in there is, I'm highly grateful right now. I'm really feeling that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Good for you. Um, and I know you're in Chicago.
Yep.
So, summertime, it's getting to be that time of year. People are going to travel to Chicago. What's a couple cool things somebody could do in this city this summer when they're there on vacation?
Yeah. So, and I know you're familiar with Chicagoan too. So, of course, always the food. Everybody knows Chicago's famous for food, and you can't go wrong with so many of the restaurants. They really up the bar. I've always had people come in town too, and people are shocked if you haven't ever been to Chicago that we have beaches here. Oak Street Beach, North Avenue Beach, Montrose Beach, and people are always like, you got beaches? Like, I've had California people come in and just absolutely shocked that we have cool beaches. There's a ton of tourist things to do, but it's the architecture tours. I would, if you're really just kind of absorb it as the city it is, it's amazing architecture. It's structural, can't beat the food. And to go to a Midwest city and hang out on a beach is pretty cool in its own way too. So
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, the beach is great in the city, but I have to say, you can't beat Huntington Beach or Manhattan Beach
oh
here in
no, I'm not
California.
trying to compare. Yeah, I can't. Yeah, there's no way. There's no way we can't hold a candle to that. But it's cool for what we have. All right, give us some slack here, Mike.
100%, 100%. Yeah, and I have to say the food though. The food is the big thing, because I can't find a good Chicago beef sandwich or hot
Yeah.
dog or a good Chicago pizza anywhere here. So
I'll tell you, yeah, when I travel too, I do notice. I'm not knocking anybody for wherever he's at. I don't want to be pompous, but the food is top notch.
yeah, for sure. Hey, Paul, thanks for being here this
Absolutely.
morning. Hey, if people want to reach out to you and connect maybe about some point of purchase stuff or more about your podcast, how do they
Absolutely.
do that?
So I think the easiest is my email that's floating on the screen there, just intrinsic mindset at Gmail. I think that's just a good personal email for me to start communication. If you want to come on the show and discuss some of the things we talked about today, I love riffing with people and their ideas. I want to, I want to explore the genius with other people. So
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm looking forward to being on your show also. So,
absolutely.
yeah, well, listen, it has been great. I'm grateful for Carl this morning for connecting us for sure. And it was good to meet you and get to spend some time together, get to know you a little bit more. So I appreciate you. I just want to encourage people, hey, if you're thinking about something that we talked about this morning, reach out to Paul. Paul be more than happy to have you on his podcast or talk to you a little bit more about fluidity, mindset, gratitude, whatever we chatted about this morning. Because I think life as an entrepreneur causes us to go in different directions, get pulled in different directions. And some of what we talked about this morning can be helpful.
Yeah.
Paul, thanks for being here. I want to say, tell my guests again, we're here every Thursday morning at 8:30 Central Time. Grab a cup of coffee, sit in with us because you never know who's on or what we're going to be talking about. Have a great week, everybody. We'll look forward to seeing you soon.